You're listening to Bigfoot Society podcast, hosted by our captain, Jeremiah Byron, where it's all Bigfoot all the time. Have you ever had the urge to do more, to be more? Now you can by joining Bigfoot Society on the Patreon. Get ad-free episodes and even member-only episodes. Take part in movie night and even live video chats. Interact behind the scenes with Jeremiah and other Patreon members like me, Leia. The powerful podcast goes on, and you may contribute a verse in our Patreon community. Carpe diem. Seize the day, Bigfooters, and make your lives extraordinary.
Welcome to Bigfoot Society. If you have Bigfoot activity to report from the same areas discussed in this episode, please reach out to me directly after this episode. And if you'd like to be on the podcast to discuss a personal Bigfoot encounter, please reach out to me directly at bigfootsociety@gmail.com. Do you wish there was more Bigfoot Society to listen to every week? Well, there is now. If you become a supporting member over at Patreon, you get a special members-only episode every single week on Wednesdays, and sometimes even more episodes. Head on over to patreon.com/The Bigfoot Society. And now let's get on with the show. The following interview was one of the hardest that I have done due to myself having a history with cancer in the 1980s. When my friend Tobe Johnson reached out to me to request that I consider doing this interview, as Sonia was at the point where she needed to get things on record that she never had, I dropped everything and made it work. As you can tell in this interview, I do have a head cold, but we made this one work. Flash of Beauty recorded their interview that Sunday, and I did mine the following Monday, the day after. I was glad I was able to interview Sonia when I did, and please enjoy this interview. All right, Bigfoot Society, I've got the privilege of interviewing Sonya Zohar today. Sonia is a Bigfoot researcher based out of Washington State. How are you doing today, Sonia?
I'm doing well today, Jeremiah. Thank you for asking. As a lot of my friends and family know, and I am in late stages cancer, so I'm short of breath sometimes, so I might sound a little funny while we talk, but that's what's kind of going on right now. And so just let the audience know that right away. Yeah?
Absolutely. I think that's a great place to start. I was introduced to you by a mutual friend, Tobe Johnson, who had told me that you were at the point where you were wanting to make sure that your story was fully shared, and there'd been more than a few things that you haven't really shared throughout your life about your research. So we're going to spend that time today to give you the chance and the opportunity to share what you would like to have shared about your life. Let's start at the beginning. What was it that first got you into your Bigfoot research?
Well, that in itself, to me, looking back on it, and that's kind of the point of this. And as you know, I've been researching since 2007, and I've done physical expeditions and physical research, and I've also done a lot of obviously theoretical research. But given that all of these years, the most important thing is, to me, was always to maintain a certain level of credibility while also trying to share as much truth as possible. But the reality of my experience, as it turns back, as I look back, really about 80% of what I was dealing with was paranormal. 20% was physical. Yeah, you'd find a track every now and there'd be a rock throw, You'd find the one twist breaks, and, you'd find physical evidences, but the interactions were always more than something natural. To give you an example, my first expedition in Montana itself was pretty paranormal, but even more so, I completely had the hitchhiker effect, and I never talked about that, where after I was in Montana for my first expedition, when I came home, all of these things were happening at my home. And even like I said, my interest in Bigfoot, looking back on it, does seem a little strange. And why I say this is because I actually didn't believe in Bigfoot. And I love anthropology. Diane Fossey and Jane Goodall and Ian Redmond are like my heroes. And I never believed in Bigfoot because I believed in that misconception, like a lot of people, if something was that big in the forest, we'd have to know. Like there's no way with all the cameras and technology and people hiking that if something that large was roaming the forest in North America, that we'd had to have seen it and known about it. But so I never believed in it. And then I watched a television show. I had some friends of mine when I lived in Los Angeles kind of lovingly bully me into watching a Bigfoot show, which I had no interest in. But I sat down with my friends. We had some beers. We watched this Bigfoot show. And Jimmy Chilcott was on the show, and he talked about the significance of dermal ridges and that the cast he was given to analyze had dermal ridges. And then he said, he would stake his 20-year career that we had an unknown bipedal primate in North America. And when he said that, something in me, literally, like my whole essence, my whole being shifted, and my whole life just flipped to Bigfoot. I mean, I literally went to my computer, and the energy was, I had to know for myself. There was nothing to prove. I wasn't going to go out and prove Bigfoot existed. It's like, I just had to know for me if it did. I just couldn't imagine that we would have an 8 to 10 foot tall, primate in our forest in North America, and they had not been discovered. Like, that just didn't make any sense to me whatsoever. And the first thing I did was watch the Paterson film for over a year. And I didn't really watch too much commentary. I just watched the film every night over and over again to prove to myself that I believed it was legitimate or I believed it was fake. And once I came to the determination for myself that it was completely legit, it's not a fake, and, mostly because Patty has breasts, and a lot of researchers don't, point that out, but we have to be very honest with ourselves and say if it was a costume, even today in our human augmentations, when women get breast implants, they don't move. Yet here in 67, you have a costume with moving breasts on them? Like, no. If we can't do that at the highest technology that we have today, then there's no way in 1967 that those cowboys pulled off moving breasts on a 8-foot-tall being walking through the forest. And so that was kind of the clincher for me. I was like, this film is legitimate. And why I'm saying like even this whole experience is a little paranormal is because I've never obsessed on anything like this. My personality is kind of like a tumbleweed. I enjoy all life. I've moved a lot. I've had many different careers, many different stages of my being that I've enjoyed all of them. But I'm not someone to work at the same insurance job for 20 years. Like that is just not my personality. I might work there for 4 years, but not 20, right? So for me to be so obsessed and just like passionately from the heart obsessed, it was noticeable. That it was weird to me. Like, what is this thing called Bigfoot that I'm just completely enthralled with in every essence, my scientific mind and the part of my essence that believes in the paranormal. I'm an empath, so as a child and as an adult, I do experience ghosts. I'm not a dabbler, meaning I don't need to promote that energy in my life. I've never promoted it or never utilized it because I've always felt, like Nietzsche says, if you stare into the abyss too long, the abyss stares back. Well, that is the truth about ghosts. Once they know, if the haunting is conscious, not all hauntings are conscious, but if the haunting is conscious and you're aware of it, then it becomes aware of you. And to me, that was always really creepy. I didn't like it. And so my whole life I just dismissed that, avoided it. I knew it was part of my life, but I wouldn't be someone who would open up, let's go look for ghost hunters. Like, no, I don't need to play with that. And so, like I said, just the beginning, the energy, the essence of being called, and that's how I really feel. I felt I was called to do this research, and it was beyond my control even to do it. I was just so passionate about it. Everything after that show in 2007 became Bigfoot in my life. And then on my first expedition, when I was flying into Montana, and I'm at the window seat, and I look over this mountain pass, and I get this energy. For me, being an empath is you know something. You just know it. And I get this energy, oh, they travel across here. And I was looking at the tops of the mountains. And then I said, what? To myself, what do you mean nature? But I knew that Sasquatch was already speaking to me. Again, I dismissed that a little bit, but right at the get-go, right at the outset. And then we get out to this territory, and, my first time out, I have the Bigfoot experience, which, again, is not common. There are researchers who have been in the field for 30 years, and, yeah, they find tracks, they find tree breaks, they hear things, but having a full-on experience of them may or may not happen for them. And for me, it did, right away, on the first time. And even that was really strange. I got it. Who does that? Who goes out in the forest the first time with the intention to look for Bigfoot, a Sasquatch, and they have the experience? And my first day there, hiking in Lewis and Clark National Park, I found a track. And then every night, something would show up at our trailer and throw rocks at my trailer every night. And then there were very strange vocalizations that my colleague said was Bigfoot, but still I wasn't convinced. Even though I had this hunch that Bigfoot could be real, I still wasn't thoroughly in my mind believing it. And although I was compelled to find out. And so over the course of 8 or 9 days, we had some sort of interaction every night, culminating on the last 2 days where one vocalized to me. And it had gone through the series of, it started off by, at the end of the night when the sun was going down, my colleague and I, we were leaning up against a fence, looking at this private property that was a hunting property, and we were watching the elk come out into this meadow for the night. And the elk were pretty far away, I would say from where I was standing, 3 football fields. The elk were super tiny when we were looking at them, but we could see them across this big meadow. And the sun was setting. And then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, there was this loud crack, like lightning. And my colleague looked at me, I looked at him, and he said, that's probably a bull elk breaking a branch. They do that. And I'm like, okay. And also, I'll let you know, too, I'm always kind of a city kid. And so I don't really, I didn't at that time know a lot about, elk habits. Or even I had to go home after that trip and just do all of my studying on vocalizations and getting a good grasp at like what a deer can sound like, what an elk can sound like, what a raccoon, a fox, you know, the things that we might hear in the forest, so I could vet those things, you know. And I learned my vocalizations really well right off the bat. But at that time, I was still kind of very new to kind of forest. I mean, I'd gone hiking before, don't get me wrong, but I'd never been in a research situation, right, where I'm looking for something. And so there was a loud crack. And then, so let's say that crack was at 11 o'clock. And then there was a loud crack at like 9 o'clock. And then there was a loud crack at 7 o'clock. And then there was a loud crack directly behind me at 6. And they were like mini lightning strikes. And they happened successively, like crack, crack, crack. So they were fast. And my colleague said, "Are you ready to confront?" And I was looking at him like, "What do you mean? There's a strange noise. What are you talking about?" And he said, "Sonia, nothing moves that fast in the forest. We have a Sasquatch here." And I was like, okay, this is crazy. I don't know if I believe this, you know, like, but the one thing I did definitely take in all of this research was I made myself remember I bought the ticket, take the ride. So if an experienced researcher is telling me Sasquatch is there and asking me if I can confront, and he told me to go walk into the tree line and say something or do something, I did it. You know, there's no other guide to this kind of work. And so I walked into the tree line and I started talking, but then it didn't seem like there was anything there. And I honestly didn't even know what to say, you know, because, you know, what are you supposed to say to a Sasquatch in the forest, right? Especially when you still quite don't believe. But I said, well, I'll just treat it like I would any other animal. If there had been a deer there or an elk there, I would talk to it. That's just my nature. I love animals. And so I was like, "Hi, who's here? Like, where are you?" Because one of the things about my whole experience dealing with Sasquatch is, quite honestly, I never got the visual. I never saw them. I never saw them physically. I heard them, experienced them, but, you know, much to my disappointment, you know, I've never felt my research was over because I actually never did see them, you know, and that's kind of a shame after all these years. But anyway, there's no energy, no noise. So the sun had gone down by this time. My colleague was getting nervous because he didn't want to be there after dark with them, and said, let's go back to the ATV and go back to camp. And I'm like, okay. So we get back to the ATV, and what was really interesting, I kept looking at the ATV, and I knew somebody had been there. And I even asked my colleague, I said, "Hey, look at the ATV right now. Is something out of place?" He's like, "No." He goes, "Why do you ask?" And I go, "I just feel like somebody's been here." And it's kind of like that feeling you get, like maybe you leave your house and you didn't close your door all the way. And when you get home, your door is kind of half open. And you're like, "I always lock my door." And then you kind of walk in your house kind of slowly to see what's going on and why your door is open. And nobody's there. And then you're kind of like, okay, that was strange. Whatever, and you just go about your business. That's kind of how I felt about the ATV. When we walked upon it, I felt like somebody had been there. It was a very strong sense of that. And then we walk over to the ATV, and we start to load up to go. And there's a much softer crack now across this little, like, it wasn't even a logging road, more like a snowmobile road in the winter, this tiny little dirt path that we were on. Now the tree line is across from us, and there's this soft crack. And now I am really intrigued. super intrigued. And I'm not really paying attention to my colleagues or like safety. Now I'm super curious. And I'm like, who's there? Where are you? And then I'm like, can you make another noise? And then snap. And so I go back and forth for about 20 minutes asking it for a response and actually getting one. And I would get a soft crack or that sound people say they make, which I've heard that kind of sounds like a pop, you know? And you can make that noise by when you put your finger in your mouth and you just pull along your cheek and it makes kind of a pop noise. That's what it sounds like. And so it was back and forth between those sounds and I was following them. And then I realized I was pretty far into the tree line and my colleague was still back by the ATV. And little did I know at that time, this is all hindsight, my colleague at that time was really afraid of them. He did the research, but he always had a gun with him. I don't know what the situation was with him about them not liking him. Maybe he forced his way into their territories, but it became obvious years later that anytime I had been with him, the Sasquatch were like more like hostile, throwing rocks and big ones, like not like I'm over here kind of thing, right? But nevertheless, I'm following these noises, these sounds into the tree line, and then all of a sudden I realized there's quite a distance between me and my colleague. And that was one of the first things he said to me was, you have to know, Sonia, that if one gets a hold of you, I can't catch it. I can't track it. You'll be gone. Do you get that? And I'm like, yeah. And it's funny, like, you know, I did get that. Like, we're doing research on an unknown animal. Anything could go wrong, you know? Plus, sometimes when people give you warnings like that, you don't heed them until you actually experience that phenomena, right? Anyway, but in that moment, when I realized the distance that had been made between me and my colleague, I sat down on a log and said, you come here. I'm not going any farther. I go, you have to come here now. I've come a long ways. You got to meet me in the middle. So wherever you are, come out. I want to see you. And I would say things like that, like, I came all the way here from California just to see you and meet you. What are you? Where are you? And I could just tell that the forest went silent after that. After I sat down and said I wouldn't follow it, the forest just went quiet. And so I went over, got back on that ATV, very excited. My colleague was really freaked out. He said he'd never seen anyone like ask for a phenomena from them and like interact like that. He'd never seen anything like that. So he was thrilled. I was thrilled. We come back the next day, which just happened to be my last day there. And because early the next Saturday morning, I had a flight out. So basically this was it. We went and spent the day there. We had some of that interaction right off the bat. But as soon as I said I'm only going this far, the energy just kind of left. And so finally I just looked at my colleague and said, well, if they want us to go this way, let's go. Let's just go. And so we hiked back in there for a couple of hours and nothing really happened. We had a moment where we both looked over our shoulder at the same time. So something was around us, but something spooked us. But that also could have been a wild animal. We just both, it was very interesting. We're just sitting there and we both turned over our right shoulders and looked really hard. And we hadn't heard anything. We both just kind of felt something. But that was all that happened. And so we've got to go break down camp and get me ready to have my flight early in the morning. And so we leave. And of course, on our way out, and that's another phenomenon that I have experienced, is that Sasquatch follow you out. They may not show up while you're there, but when you leave, they follow you out for some reason. Anyway, I think it may have to do with the fact that they really do have a sense of humor. And so they kind of know you've been there all day, and then when you leave, they show up, and it's almost like a teasing or a taunting, or it could be territorial. if we go more the scientific part of it, it may want to know that you are definitively out of its territory, right? And so those are, like I'm saying, like the two lines, that the two systems of thinking that you kind of have to have. You know, there could be this paranormal aspect, but there could be this completely natural reasoning for it. And so that's another reason why I was always soft on talking about the paranormal, because there could be we're dealing with a new species of animal, and so lots of things could happen that we're not aware of anyway, scientifically. And so there we are, last day, getting on the ATV, and it shows up. And it made a loud crack. And I had just started to grab an apple to eat for myself because I was starving. And just when that happened, and so I grabbed a second apple and threw caution to the wind, because I'm so curious now to what is happening. And something definitely is happening. I run back into the forest, and I'm pretty far into the tree line, and I said, okay, I have this apple for you. It's really good. It's a gift. You can eat it, but you have to show me where you want it. You have to show me. And all of a sudden, like out of the blue, out of a non-windy day, these 3 tall pine trees started shaking back and forth, almost like hitting each other, like it was no small movement. They were good-sized pine trees, and I'm probably, 10 inches in diameter, which is not huge, but like I said, not small either to move. And these 3 trees just started shaking back and forth. And I'm like, okay, that's where you want it. So then I ran over to the trees, and I climbed up on another tree, and I stuck the apple up pretty high, so like a deer wouldn't be able to necessarily, as high as I could get it up there, so that whatever I was leaving this apple for, it could get to it. And based on the idea that it would be Sasquatch. And as soon as I stuck the apple up there and started eating mine and explaining that they could eat it, again, I didn't know I'm totally naive to the whole research thing, right? So I didn't know people have been giving them foods and apples and all this stuff. I just watched the Gimlet film and then met up with someone to take me out in the forest. And anyway, all of a sudden on my right side, from this very dense, bushy kind of area where I really couldn't see in there, I heard a vocalization. And it was a long, grovelly growl, grumble, but not aggressive. It wasn't like a hiss or nothing aggressive. But the crazy and most beautiful thing about it was it was honestly punctuated by a question mark at the end. So my breathing and my vocal range will not allow me to do exactly what I heard, but I'll give you a little short version. So basically, all of a sudden I hear this like the question mark at the end. And I didn't know what was happening. I didn't know what was going on. And I turned and I looked towards my colleague who was at the ATV, squatted behind the ATV with a gun. And hindsight makes me wonder after all these years, because when I really, again, I was naive when I went in, why hadn't he pulled out a camera instead of pulling out his gun? So there's a part of me that may suspect that he really just did want to shoot one, and maybe that's why they didn't like him. So, because I've never been able to answer that question. Like in all of that interaction, that was basically his job, was to protect me, yes, but more importantly, to film. And he never pulled out a camera. So I'll leave that at that. So I turned to him after this vocalization, and I scream at him at the top of my lungs, "Are you effing with me? Are you effing kidding me? are you playing me right now? Like, what is going on? And he just raised his hands up in the air, and he said, and with a gun in one hand, don't kid yourself. And he said, I'm right here. I'm not doing anything. He says, keep talking. Just keep talking. And so then I talked some more, and then it vocalized again. But the truth was, it was sunset. I had a 6 a.m. flight out, totally naive to this whole process, and realized that I had to go. And so I just said to it, I'm so sorry, but I have to leave. I have to leave in the morning, and I'm so happy that you're here, and here's an apple for you. I think, too, I was in a little bit of a state of shock because I didn't know what was going on. So it was hard for my brain to process this kind of crazy phenomena that was happening. And so especially the vocalization, like what was that? And part of me was so still new at this research. Like I said, I wasn't totally a believer when I went into the forest the first time. And so I was a little bit discombobulated by it all and naively left. I should have canceled my flight and stayed forever. But nevertheless, we drive away, get on the ATV, and we begin to drive back to camp. And this is when I really realized that this was paranormal. Like, there's no doubt that it's biological, but it also is paranormal. And that's because as we started to maneuver the ATV back up this hill, and we're moving away from, where I just had this experience, all of a sudden, everything in my body was devastatingly sad. Like, it felt like when you break up with a significant other and you're the heartbroken one. It was just so hard and so sad. And I started crying. And I'm observing myself because this is an out of context emotional response. And this is part of Sasquatch phenomena, right? Here I am crying because I'm leaving. And I can't even figure out why I would be crying over that. And then I turned my head back and looked where I just had that interaction. And it came to me very clear. It said, Sonia, this is him. This is him. He's sad that you're leaving. And then that's like when I said, we drove off, and it sealed the deal for me that this was 20% biological and 80% what the heck is going on paranormal. And so, but I am a science girl. I have an education, and I like things to be testable, repeatable. And so in my own research, I wanted to maintain a certain air of credibility. And I think a lot of people who deal with the paranormal aspect of it, that's what they're trying to do, is maintain credibility in a field where it's really hard to have credibility, just because by the nature of the fact that you're in that field. And I think that's why you have a lot of Bigfooters who completely yell at the paranormal people, because they want it to be 100% biological. And it's not the way we understand biology. That was like my first experience, and that's when I really knew that something was up. And then, when I got home, I had the hitchhiker effect, which I told no one about except for my close colleagues at all. And what that means is the hitchhiker effect is that the phenomena follows you home, and you start having things happen around your home. And I did. I would come home and find tree branches stuck in the earth, at least 6 inches deep, with no explanation, all of a sudden. And I would come home and find sticks like that. Sometimes they didn't even make sense. All you had to do is touch them, and they would fall over. Like they were so uniquely placed that they were also placed in a kind of balance. And I can only say this is a phenomenon because it never happened before. I lived on that property for over 5 years. And I never found that until after I came home from Montana. I was given gifts and trails, and one time a deer. And I will say a deer because I was flying out early in the morning, and the night before, I had heard this crazy scream in my backyard. And it did not sound like a deer, although it could have been the deer, based on what I discovered. And then in the morning, and I didn't go out at night to check out what that was, because we also had cougars in my area, and I'd seen them on my property before. So, yeah. Anyway, I woke up in the morning, get in my car, and I see behind my house, I see vultures circling. And I'm like, that's really strange. And so I went out into my backyard to see what it was, and there was a deer there. But the crazy thing was about it is that there was a perfect circle cut out of its abdomen area. It was a perfect circle, and there was like nothing in there. So it was so hard to explain. It was just like blood. And so, but the thing was, is the cut on it was a perfect circle. Now, if there's a hunter out there right now that's going to say, oh, I've seen perfect circles cut into carcasses, then maybe it was the cougar. But from all I know is the cougar leaves, which had happened before, is cougar leaves heads. They leave a head. You come out on your property and there's a deer head. That's what you find when a cougar's been there. So, like I said, if I'm mistaken in that, then I am. But I've not talked to anybody who could explain the perfect circle. And the vultures hadn't landed yet. It was so bizarre. It was the weirdest thing. And I know Randy Brisson has also been left gift of deer and elk. One time he got out of his tent and there were elk legs hung in branches around his tent. And so they do bring gifts like cats. Sometimes those gifts may not be so palatable for us, but nevertheless, they do it. Then also, that's the place where I received my heart rock, one of the most beautiful things. And if you watch A Flash of Beauty, you can see those rocks. You'll be able to physically see what I'm talking about. But I had taken my property backed up to 200-acre, like, non-developable land. It was owned by the federal government. It wasn't a park, but there had been, in that marsh back there, there is a lily that only grows in that marsh, one place in the whole planet. And so the government came in and took 200 acres and made it non-developable. So I had this amazing wildlife corridor that ran through my property, and I loved that. But the truth is, there were never any people back there. As long as I lived there, I was, like I said, there for 5 years, and I was out there every day because I do photography. And so I was out there all the time, and I did nature photography for quite some time. And so I was always out there. I never saw another human walking back there, ever. So one day I decided to leave a crystal in an oak tree back there hidden, and just to see what would happen, because I was starting to acknowledge that I had a hitchhiker. And because there's part of me not even acknowledging it. So many things happened, like my wood pile would be messed with. I would come out. I have pictures of these where my chopping block, which was this massive redwood round, literally I couldn't really lift it myself. Not because it was so heavy, more that it was so heavy and so awkward. I couldn't lift it alone. There's no way. And I came out one morning to get some wood, and the wood block is on top of the wood pile. And I'm just like, really? Like, who did that? Are my neighbors that are about a mile away sneaking over here at night, messing with me because they know I do Bigfoot? Like, how does that happen? So things like that happened all the time. And again, I would just say, okay, all right, that happened. And then, like I said, part of me just wouldn't, just like, okay. I would be a bit dismissive. And so finally, I decided to play, and I left a tiger eye heart-shaped crystal in an oak tree in that area out there. And I had come back. I left it out there for 6 weeks, and nothing had happened. And it had moved sometimes. Like I knew it was facing this way, or it had moved. But again, you know, a squirrel, a raven could do that easily. But it never fell off the tree. It would be moved, but not off the tree. Had a special little, like, crevice that I put it in. Anyway, after 6 weeks, I decided that nothing was happening, so I should just bring the heart back. Like, okay, all right, nothing's going on out here. Bring that heart back. And so the next morning I woke up, and on my doorstep was a natural rock that was a heart shape that was literally almost the same identical size as my crystal. Shape and everything. Matter of fact, the crystal, there was a part of the crystal that had this vein that didn't polish smooth because it was a little too deep. And this rock, this naturally formed rock heart, had the same crevasse. It was unbelievable. You know, and again, I have talked a little bit about this, you know, about the paranormal side, because it also is so beautiful. Like, I love those hearts. They're amazing. Like, how does that happen? And, you know, and again, I never saw Sasquatch. Everything I am talking about is the phenomena of Sasquatch. So there's a part of me that wonders, you know, like, what paranormal thing it really is. How did something follow me home and play with me like that?
Exactly. Sonia, I've got more than a few questions. This whole account is absolutely incredible. At any point when you got back home, did you start having very vivid dreams or start hearing voices or anything like that?
Well, that's very interesting, because that would only happen when I was around Mike Paterson. And I worked with Mike Paterson out of Toronto, and I do know that there's a large part of the community that doesn't believe him, and, you know, that's really sad. But what I can tell you is that his area is the most paranormal I've ever been in. Hands down. The most paranormal. And Mike and I worked together for a while, and he came out to California, and when I was around him, I would get visuals, like there was one, like a white Sasquatch. I would see it just pop into my mind, you know? And it happened several times while we were working together out in California. And then the first craziest thing that happened is when I went out the first time to his territory, and I walked into this cabin. We opened the door, and he walked ahead, you know, and he picked his room and took his stuff into where he was going to stay. And then I walked in and started putting the stuff in my room. And I heard that call, that Mike call that he says, where Nefertia says, Mike. Like, I heard it plain as day. And so I walked back over into his room, and I'm like, what are you doing? And he's like, I'm just unpacking, you know, getting my stuff out. I go, did you play Neff's voice? And he's like, no, what are you talking about? You know, I go, did you play a recording? He's like, no. You know, he's totally oblivious to what happened. And I clearly heard that. So yeah, I did have mind speak. But mind speak for me was heightened when I was around Mike Paterson and Randy Brisson. Randy Brisson's territory is pretty amazing and well well habituated. Mike Paterson's been going to his territory for years now. I don't know, like 12 years or something. I 10 years, and Randy Brisson, he was raised in those woods, He's in British Columbia, and his territory, from the age of 0 to 16, he ran that territory barefoot. He didn't even wear shoes back there. He was definitely part of that territory, and he's had, that's why he has so much kind of evidence. Like you can go on YouTube. I've never seen a red bear that looks like an orangutan in British Columbia, but if you want to call it an orangutan, okay. But he clearly got a really great shot of something walking away from a tree, actually just starting to stand up and move away from the tree. And it's autumn orange, like autumn red. It's orange. It's not I don't think that's a bear. I've never seen an orange bear. So, and the shape of it actually still doesn't really look like a bear. So those two people, when I would work with them, the phenomena would just be off the chart. I had in Randy's territory, like right in a row. And I don't know what this means. Like maybe they didn't want me back there. They didn't like me or Randy that day. But, I saw two trees go down in one day within 20 minutes of each other and about, a block apart kind of. And they were big, massive trees. I don't know how many people have seen a tree go down in the forest. Not saying it doesn't happen, but like we're walking down the trail and I said, they follow you out. We were leaving and then a tree went down. It was a massive tree right behind us. And then we walked a little bit farther, like 2 minutes or whatever, a minute or so, and another one went down. And not, anywhere near us to hurt us or any way that it would have got us. But what was that? How often did two trees go down in the forest and you witness it? Oh, Randy's territory is amazing. There are so many things. And so the kind of empath, the mind speak, would definitely happen more. It would definitely be more prevalent around Randy and Mike. Out of my own, I didn't really get the mind speak. I know the one, like I said, the first one shared its emotions with me, but I didn't have like any sort of like dialogue, But like I said, the first day walking into the cabin and I hear Mike, and I'm thinking, and I'm not even thinking, that Mike's messing with me, more than I'm thinking maybe he was on his computer going through some of his stuff. Mike is super dedicated to the research. He's about 90% more obsessed than I am. And so he takes this research very seriously. And it's a massive part of his life. With that said, I know people have a hard time with this stuff, but that is just what it is. I'm just saying from my personal experience, the place is the most paranormal I've ever been in. And another reason why this one colleague of mine, I said that I worked with in the past, I said that if they didn't like him, I've heard people say that they can give you headaches. They can give you like a pain, like brain freeze. And when I was with Randy and this colleague, we were walking through the forest and we were on this trail. All of a sudden, I started to feel a migraine come on. And I was like, oh no, I'm going camping for 3 days and I'm going to get a migraine. And I'm like, no. And then just as I was saying no, both this colleague and Randy fell to the ground at like just the same time with their heads hurting. They're like, ow. So that happened. There's some sort of connection with Sasquatch with Y sticks, like the letter Y, that perfectly are shaped like a Y for the most part. And all of their bark is peeled. And sometimes you'll find them in the forest, like the Blair Witch Project. Something's made art of them, you know, and it's a very strange kind of thing to see in the forest. But I do think I was never creeped out by them, but I thought they were something they do, like building the structures, right? But this is more like an art form. Oh, here's really quick, a beautiful physical story. So amazing. I was up in Nordic, Canada, getting on an ATV, just flying down this road, and I saw a tree break, and it was massive. It was at least 19 feet tall, and it was a one-twist break, just like they say. The end of the tree was still alive, and I made my colleague stop. He didn't stop, and it's so funny. I was like, no, we have to, well, you've got to stop and look at this thing. He goes, I don't want to know about that. He goes, I don't want to know about it. And then I walked into the tree line. I said, well, I'll be back. And I walked into the tree line, and there was this space, and it was about the size of, I'll say, a 20 by 20 area where there were all these tiny structures. Like not one of them was over 3 feet, and there were about 30 of them. It was so beautiful. I don't know what that was about.
How far away from civilization were you at that point?
And get this, 8 miles from a cell signal.
Whoa.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oof. This was with an individual that we're leaving unnamed, correct? Throughout your years of research, has there been anything that you learned that you felt scared to share because it would change the community or world too much?
No.
Okay.
Actually, I think in all life, and for me especially, you know, I have to bottom out of the truth, you know, and the truth, I believe that the truth is more important than anything. And, you know, we live in a time where people don't no longer even think that the truth is important or that the truth is esoteric. It's not a real thing, which is frightening to me. You know, red is red. That is the truth. You know? And so this idea that, I mean, I know for a fact, we'll get into kind of the, you know, this other conspiracy theory part of the Bigfoot world, is that, you know, the government's keeping us from this knowledge. And I believe that 100%.
As do I. Yeah, definitely.
There's just too many stories of where, you know, of where, especially like the first one that comes to mind is, of course, you know, Mount St. Helens. I believe that story. There are too many witnesses. There's like 5 witnesses that all corroborate that the U.S. government showed up and helped a family of Sasquatch regain their health.
Did you talk to people directly, witnesses, or these are things that you've read places or heard?
Like seen a documentary.
Okay, gotcha.
You know, like a Bigfoot thing about Mount Rainier. No, I never talked to them firsthand, but that's just a story that I believe. I don't know why. When you hear what the gentlemen say about it, it's pretty amazing. And just wait. Brett and Jill and Tobe and Mike are doing another film, and it's on Ron Sierra Sounds, and the story is huge. Like what Ron has shared is such a small part of all that went on. And probably just because, I don't think he was hiding anything more or being elusive more than the most important thing was, working to get someone to buy, scientifically the credibility of those Sierra sounds, of those recordings, which, they're recording back then on 8-track tapes. It wasn't like the technology of today.
Oh, exactly. Yeah. Yeah. It was a whole different ball game. So far, we've talked about Montana, British Columbia, and you said Alberta as well, right?
Paterson is out of the Toronto area.
Okay, gotcha. Did you do any expeditions or research in Oregon or Washington State?
I was invited once to the Owl Moon Lab, and we had some things happen. Well, yeah, the black cat showed up. Third part of that heart story happened. It's very unusual. My neighbor came over. I have to back up. Okay, so unfortunately, I lost 2 precious little beings in my life. I lost my cats, and they were brother and sister, and they had so much personality. Like, they were Instagram famous worthy, especially the little boy, because he was a munchkin cat. But I let him be indoor-outdoor, and so, he thought he was an 8-foot tall tomcat when he just had, these legs he was adorable, like a Welsh Corgi cat. Just imagine that. And anyway, got Shiva, and what I never had imagined ever is that an animal would simply die of a broken heart. So when you have cats, cats are like chickens. Everything wants to kill your cat. So, like, everything wants to eat chicken. Like, there's not an animal that won't eat a chicken. And there's lots of predators for cats. Indoor, outdoor. You just know that one day you're going to come home and either a coyote, a hawk, a bobcat, or your neighbor's dog is going to get your cat. So when the neighbor's dog took Shiva, I was devastated, but I'd surrendered a long time ago to the possibility of that being a reality. But Collie, after he passed away, his sister just crawled up on my bed and never really left. Didn't want to go outside. She'd still eat. She'd still get cuddles, but she virtually never left my bed. And then she died. She just died. She was so sad. So losing them was really difficult. They had brought me a ton of joy in their personalities, and then the way they went out was very bittersweet because they just didn't let me know how close that those two really were. Anyway, sorry about my cats, but it leads into this story where my neighbor, like 4 years later, or not 4 years later, 2 years later, I'm going down, and I live in a small apartment complex, and I'm going down to go do something, and my neighbor walks up to me, and she goes, Sonia, she goes, I had the weirdest thing happen. And I'm like, what happened? And she said, well, she said, I just got back from the grocery store, and when I got out of my car, there was nothing by my door. And when I came back, this was by my door. And she said, something said to me that it belongs to you. Well, she handed me this heart, and it was a heart made from like pottery. It was human made, but and it was really beautiful. But when I flipped it over, it had a white cat looking up towards the heavens that looked like my little Shiva. He was a white and gray cat, and this cat's kind of whitish and gray. And I'm like, whoa. And then the whole kind of, like, I knew this was for you. I didn't know my neighbor that well. I would say hi in passing, but I'd never, like, been for a house and even had tea, so, or something like that. So for her to say, this is for you, and to give it to me, and then to go upstairs and look at my rocks, my heart rocks that I'd already got, and that heart was also the exact same size. And so I really believe that was a gift from Sasquatch, from spirits, their energy, just knowing that there was a deep hurt there. So then, when we're literally filming, and this all has to do with Oregon. I know it's going a long ways to get to Oregon, but anyway, I was invited down to the Owl Moon Lab with Tobe, who the Owl Moon Lab also was paranormal. He definitely had some energy there. And we experienced it because as we're filming, well, before that, the day before, we were hiking through the forest, and my friend and I saw a black cat that looked just like my collie. And it was so interesting because it's not very often you're out in the forest in Oregon and you see a cat just trampling through the forest. That's never been my experience in hiking, to see a domestic cat just running. But nevertheless, my best friend and I both saw this black cat and thought that was really interesting. And then the next day, Brett and Jill were filming me and Mike. And as we were talking, right in front of us, between the camera and myself, Brett notices this round like coin that has a smiling black cat on it. It's like a wood coin with a smiling black cat. And we all just looked at that because they know the story about my cats. They knew the story, and they'd never seen that there before. And Tobe had never seen that before. And it was sitting there right there in the driveway. The truth is, for me, about Bigfoot is 90% of it has been, in a way, absolutely terrifying. But the experience always was actually really glorious. Mm. It's just so big. Like whatever Bigfoot is, whatever Sasquatch is, it's so big. And I don't mean physically, that it makes an impression. I've never experienced something that big. Like not even an elephant, something so big that and so smart and wise, because it like leaves things for you at places. Like I do believe that heart I spoke of earlier with the white cat was left for me by Bigfoot. That kind of knowing and understanding, and then if you experience a little bit of mind speak, and then when I talk about the blessed charge, experience how fast they are, like I'm a little bit, honestly, traumatized by that. Like, what was that? Like, what moves that fast? And then to know that it's an intelligent being that knows you're in the woods before you do. So it has its moment of intimidation, which I think when you were saying you heard a lot of screaming and hollers, like, I wonder, and I'm going to ask you, was that not in some way frightening?
It was really interesting. It definitely, I would say, physically, I had a frightened response to it. Felt like the blood rushed out of my head, down to my feet. It was hard to kind of keep in control, of like, okay, don't freak out type deal.
Yeah.
Have you ever heard of anything where Bigfoot or Sasquatch responds to someone playing a musical instrument on an expedition? Anything like that?
Well, I think all animals respond to music. And, I played music in the forest, and, the owls show up. inevitably owls will show up. But I think sometimes it has to be the right kind of music. Like maybe the harder music may be more intimidating. Maybe they might be intrigued but not come close. But something beautiful. I mean, there's these wonderfully sweet videos of people who go out and play violin for cows and for the dairy cows. And those dairy cows love that. They all run over to the fence and hang out and listen to their little music, you know? So I definitely have played music in the forest, and I've definitely had a response with that, for sure. Beautiful response. Like one time up in Randy's territory, I played music that I was connected to at a deep level, and I also sometimes would do a meditation, and sometimes I would do a prayer, you know? I think reverence to this space that we are given is what we are sorely lacking right now. If you really look at the earth and you see that it is abundant effervescence and teeming with life, you know, I like to give some thanks for that, some reverence for that. And so sometimes the songs I would play would kind of reflect that feeling in me. And one of the most beautiful experiences I've ever had is that afterwards there were these 13 vocalizations just a little bit after. And once again, I won't have the breathing capacity, nor probably the vocal possibility of actually doing what I heard. Someone in maybe opera could for sure, but it sounded like this. But it was much longer, you know, with that sweet little just drop down and in the melody. Just it was so beautiful. And there were 13 of those vocalizations. And Randy said that they liked what I did and that we needed to leave.
We need to leave. Yeah, right. That was beautiful. Thank you for doing that. I mean, I think that sounded absolutely marvelous. Thank you.
Yeah. So, and there's just so many things, you know, like I've seen effervescence in the forest, in that meditative space, in that reverent space. I really learned in a humble way, but like shocking to me, that how courageous I am and can be, you know, for actually hearing, you know, like sticking with the research, like every opportunity getting out there, that I could get out there, knowing, like I said, that 90% of it was going to be terrifying, but all of it would be glorious. If anything, Bigfoot taught me is that there is so much more beauty than I'd ever imagined on this planet.
You've mentioned meditation a few times. How did that play into your Bigfoot research?
Well, like I said, I would often, if I got the opportunity, you know, to do what I felt was reverent in the forest. It came about like this. I mean, it came even from my first expedition. It was just kind of this logical thing. And it's not to be so hard on humanity. I love humans. We're fragile, and we make really big mistakes. And I think we're a lot more fragile than we own at any given time, because our species is really fallible to making, like I said, huge mistakes. And non-humans are not like that. When the Europeans first got here, there were a couple of things that happened. One, they were not on an anthropological expedition. A lot of people don't know that immediately on the East Coast, they killed over 2 million wolves. right away. And then a few years later, it wouldn't be less than, I don't know how many years, but maybe 20 years later, they would be in the Midwest shooting 7 million bison. So if you were this like human-like species, cousin of a human, even like a Neanderthal, whatever this being could be, and it is, again, with all the paranormal is true, but so is the biology. The biology's there, or we wouldn't have footprints. So if you were this nocturnal species that interacted lightly with humans, which is kind of what a lot of the First Nations peoples say about their experience with Sasquatch, some traded berries, some traded, they would trade salmon for berries or whatever and leave baskets in the forest for each other. So they interacted, and not all the stories are like that, but quite a few of them are. You get quite a few of those sorts of countings. So if you were this, like, again, elusive but friendly, larger being that shared space, but you're nocturnal, and you start hearing gunfire for the first time, you go invisible. And so that just seems to me to be logical. And therefore, I thought, wow, I'm sure it's been many years since they have seen us be really reverent in the forest. Of course, people hike and appreciate and love nature. They are the many of us that are like that. But really just to go out and do an act of reverence, like to really like go into a deep space of meditation, of prayer, and say, thank you for all that all is, and so I thought, wow, if I do something like that, I just want to show them something of beauty, and that's all I have is my prayer. I would do that.
It makes so much sense because I've been in this really just a few years, but I have experienced being in an area, actually just this last summer, where it's a known Sasquatch area, but stuff only happened if certain people were there that had a different viewpoint towards the subject rather than people that trying to say it a certain way, but I think it all comes down to your intention of why you're doing this. And if you're in it just for a certain reason, you're probably not going to experience a lot of activity.
Because, right. So it's like a consciousness thing,
yep.
Right? More your consciousness is aligned with a higher force in our forests, the more your consciousness is appreciative of that. Like whatever it is, it's a consciousness thing where like my one colleague, I knew they didn't like him for some reason. They were always aggressive, or certain type of elusiveness, but they did show up, which is also pretty amazing. But I do think that a part of that had to do just with my openness to it, my curiosity, and it came from my heart. It wasn't coming from my head. It was truly like, that's what I said, what shifted, seemed almost paranormal, is that this whole thing for me started, it came straight from my heart. Like, what? There's this thing, what? And I remember just always, even now, just shaking my head like I did, 2007. Like, there's this possibility, there is this other being in the forest, and we have not researched it and made and found out about it and, connected with it in a real level. Yeah, I was confounded that the scientific community had turned its back on this work. And even, Jane Goodall believes, but she's not interested in research, I think, because she's like, leave them alone.
Right. That's funny. Yeah. Exactly. But yeah, she has, I believe there's video you can find where she talks about that. Yeah. From what I've seen. Do you have any advice for individuals that are wanting to go into areas? There's been known to have been Bigfoot in that areas and things they might be able to do in order to try to have that contact?
Well, I think, just go in and be peaceful and do what you're going to do. Like, set the intention. You set the intention. I'm here to see you. That's kind of what I said at the beginning. Like, come out, because I'm here to see you. Like, I'm here for you. And so I think that openness will help. For some reason, I know this is really personal, but I cannot stand the use of lights at night. I know it's hard to be in the forest when it's dark, but there's something about them that are disorienting to the space. And so the space is calmer when it's natural. A light in the forest is an intrusion, especially these big LED lights that see for 3 miles. Like, nobody wants that at night. No night creature wants that.
I'll tell you something that happened in Oregon one night when we were in this area. We were right in front of this meadow, and there was a tree line at the other side of it, and we knew they were out there. And this one individual takes a very high-powered flashlight and starts shining it along the wood line. And almost immediately, there was a massive, huge wood crack right to the right of where this flashlight was shown. But it just had this feeling like, get that light out of here. It was maybe almost like a warning. I don't know. It was very weird, though, how it was in within half a second when the light was shown over there.
There's something really funny along with your story. What it reminded me of is the story when, and I think Meldrum may have been up there. I don't remember what group went up to the cabin where they supposedly got blood samples.
Oh, are you talking about the Snellgrove Lake cabin with Doug Hychek?
I don't remember who. I'm so sorry.
Oh, no problem.
I just remember, but it's a pretty famous one where they're like these 4 researchers in this cabin that have been known for activity, and they had rocks thrown, and like people had reported rocks being thrown and pretty aggressive behavior. Well, I thought it was really funny, and I know this just seems like kind of off, but so the 4 men are there. It's getting pretty late. They're all about to hit the bay, and so one of them walks out onto the deck and pees into the forest, which is fine. What are you going to do? You're going to the bathroom. But right after that is when they had all this aggressive behavior, rocks being thrown and screams and yells and all these vocalizations. And I always thought that was really funny. I'm like, yeah, well, maybe this thing just saw you walk out and pee.
Right.
Like in its little home. You know what I mean? I just thought that was so funny. But it's a really well-known case about them being up there and being attacked. And then supposedly they put out this, well, they put out this that had little spikes on it. And so if something stepped on it, they would have blood and hair. Well, they got the blood and hair from that. So I never remember how scientifically that turned out for them, if it was unknown or what kind of species, because that happened probably about 20 years ago.
It's from an old Monster Quest episode. There's actually 2 of them.
Yes.
Yep. And Doug actually ended up going up this last year again, and he's going to be reporting on that in a future documentary, I think.
I do believe they are like people, though, in the sense, like more like humans, in the sense that sometimes they don't want you in their territory.
Yeah.
And they're not going to hurt you, but you may not have a pleasant experience. Because there are reports that reflect this. And I think we have to also have a certain amount of respect for that. If you're going into a territory where you're getting aggressive behavior, you may want to think about that. I know, okay, so just take this for what it is. I don't know if I'm making up too much about it, but it also is one of the strangest things that ever happened. So there's a place called Dosey Wallops, and it has the activity that goes on back there is a lot of rock throwing. And so it doesn't feel like overly, friendly. There's just, like I said, the reports are rock throwing. And you hear screams back there at night, for sure. And you hear vocalizations. A lot of people hear it. And, yeah, many. And I went back there, and, I do like to leave crystals. I leave them because, I think there's something beautiful and something that would draw attention, but yet it's not like a plastic toy. I'm not littering and not leaving something that in its own right doesn't belong in the forest already. So anyway, and I went back there. I had a rose quartz heart that was as big as a baseball. It was a really good chunk. And I went out there and with the intention to bring an offering of goodwill. And we walked probably a good 5 miles back into that area. And I went off trail. I went up the hill a bit, and I found this tree stump. And it was the tree stump itself would be easy enough to see from the trail, but technically there would be no reason for anybody to go up there, maybe to go to the bathroom, but the hill itself was so steep, I think someone would look for an easier place to do that. So I really did try to hide it, but also have a marker for where exactly I hid it, right? And so I did it at where this trail starts to go up this very steep ridge, and it splits and you can follow another way. And so I go up to this tree stump that is massive, and it's pretty tore up, but it was a good 5 feet in diameter at the base. And I find this little spot, and I put it in the tree, a little ledge that all you could kind of see was just a tad bit of the pink, just so you kind of saw that there might be something unusual, but I definitely left it, for the most part, out of sight as much as possible. And like I said, set the intention for goodwill. And we walked back in about 3 weeks later, and the tree stump was gone, completely gone. And it didn't even look like there wasn't a hole there. It didn't even look like you would think maybe it was rotted in the Forest Service, maybe thought it could be, even though it really could not be a danger, but, they pulled things out or something. No. That tree stump was gone. Now, I don't know what to make up about that, but it doesn't feel welcoming.
I would agree with you. Definitely. That is a very strange account. I have 2 more questions. And first I just want to say thank you for spending your time with me and for sharing some extremely interesting things from your years of research. Have you ever heard anything come out of the Lake Cushman area?
Oh, yeah. I mean, the Olympic Peninsula, this is, and Vancouver Island, are reportedly where you have the most credible witness reports
right.
of Sasquatch. With Oregon coming, I think Vancouver Island, then Washington and Oregon, kind of in that order. I may be wrong, but it feels kind of that way. So there are a lot of spots here. I mean, there's the Olympic Forest is a hot spot, like some of the Oregon forests are, unlike Northern California is, right? I mean, people still have experiences down there in the Arcata area. Like one of my favorite stories about that is I have a few friends who are retired military that said, they used to do drills all over, and they'll like drop you in somewhere and you just in the forest with nothing and you just have to survive. And those are some of my best reports, because those people didn't believe until they were in the forest with nothing for 10 days.
When they would have interactions during that time.
Oh, and maybe even hear the calls, and just know, you know what I mean? And hear the vocalizations or have the rock thrones or stuff like that, yeah, of course, they're real. Oh my goodness. Okay. This is another one of my real, truly favorite stories about Bigfoot. And it really has nothing to do with being in the field or anything. So I had my 30th high school reunion, and I hadn't made my 20th. So I decided, oh, why not? Let's do this. And I reconnected with my high school best friend, and I was really surprised when I got to the reunion, and I just didn't even think about it, but everybody was really interested in the Bigfoot thing and knowing more about what I was doing in that research. And it was really super sweet that, I had no idea people would know, especially from my high school. Anyway, my best friend at the time, we went together, and afterwards I was staying with her. And so for the weekend, just like I said, just reconnect from all those years past. And we get back to her house, and she hadn't said anything to me at all about Bigfoot. And I was kind of surprised. She hadn't said a word. And when people were talking to me about Bigfoot, she'd kind of just do her own thing, But when we got home, she gets out a bottle of wine. She pours us each a glass. She sits me down on the couch, and she looks at me and she goes, Sonia, she goes, my dad was his only job in life. He was a retired ranger, forest ranger. Well, I had forgotten that her dad was a forest ranger when I was in high school. I had never really, thought about that. I was like, oh yeah. She said, Sonia, she goes, we lived in that forest. We live in that forest. My dad works in that forest. We know they're real. She goes, but you don't go looking for them. That's crazy. I remember having, I really felt like my brain, like I said, this is how this stuff is on that edge of paranormal for me, how I respond, because she kept saying to me, that's crazy. And I said, I know. I know. But nothing in me was ever going to stop. I get it. I hear you. Thank you. I know it's crazy. But there was, like I said, I knew she was trying to warn me. But what was so odd about it is it just didn't land that way with me. I couldn't even hear it as a warning. It didn't matter. And I've never had that kind of, real, just non-negotiable experience, but her just leaning over to me, we know they're real. You don't go looking for them. That's crazy. That's Sonia. That's crazy. That's how she was saying it. And I was blown away.
It's fascinating. And I think that we keep going in years, and maybe this is me speaking as a new person to this subject, but it feels like the further I do this, the more emails I start getting from park rangers and forestry workers that say, I want to come forward. Then they don't end up doing it. But just the fact that they're even sending them gives me the feeling that we might be getting closer to more information come out. But I mean, that might just be me as a new person. I don't know.
I hope so. But, you know, like I said, we're having an odd relationship with the truth. Like all these years, it feels like UFO has been suppressed. And now that UFO is out in the open, it's like, oh, well, it could be the government doing that. You know what I mean? Like, so, and, you know, there's all these new possibilities and new types of information. And, you know, we're kind of bogged down with all of it. I think it's a little bit too much information, to be honest. Our brains,
it's a lot.
We're meant to not handle so much. I just want everyone to know that it is real and that everybody keep doing the research. Like, just keep doing it. It's fascinating.
I feel it is fascinating as well. The last question that I would like to ask, and I need to get your okay for it too first. Is it okay if I ask a question about your cancer?
Oh, yeah, of course.
Okay. Thank you. Because I've never been able to ask this question, and you'll get what I mean in a minute. So there's always a thought process in the community where there'll be people that they end up having these horrible health conditions. And as a person that is experiencing cancer, but was also a Bigfoot researcher and able to talk to you at this point, do you yourself feel like there's a connection between what you're experiencing with your Bigfoot research from years past?
Well, you know, to be quite honest with you, we can't rule it out as a possibility, right? Because there's evidence for it. And it could very well be that the shift in, for lack of a better word, the shift in an energetic dimension, no matter how that happens, could be toxic. And to even substantiate that from a very interesting source, but if we do look at the Bible as history as well, there is the accounts of the early Hebrew priests having to wear special jackets when they went into the temples to protect themselves from the energy. And that would be the energy of source, like another dimensional being. If you want to call that God for them, then that's great. But or whatever, you know, whatever spirituality you have, like if you believe that was an experience of God. But if you read the Bible, and especially the book of Enoch, you know, you discover that they would be hurt by these things, by these interactions with God. You know, they were often told not to look, you know, and to wear, like I said, the early priests, they would definitely wear these special jackets. So is it plausible? It's entirely plausible. And, you know, it could be just with even the paranormal activity in general, like maybe it's not Sasquatch specific, but just paranormal energy, right? Because there is, I mean, isn't there some, I'm asking you about this because I don't rightly know, but isn't there some evidence that would substantiate that a lot of these hotspots have an increase in radioactivity? Is that not true?
Well,
is anyone measured for that?
Yeah, actually, there has been. Yeah, there's a couple of investigators out in West Virginia that were able to get readings around an area where I believe there was a footprint, and they did find very high radioactive readings. That's Joe Perdue and Ron Lanham from West Virginia. So there definitely could be a correlation there. Yeah.
And so, you know, that just might be the physical consequence, but also know there are equally stories about Sasquatch healing people. You know, I have a friend, just one of the kind of saddest stories. So, like I said, with Sasquatch, the emotional experience, the aggressive, non-aggressive, the loving, there are examples and reports of all types of these experiences. So one of my friends who is an avid hunter, and actually he used to love to hike in the winter, and he was out, and he was a really experienced outdoorsman, where he actually would do courses for people for survival and real backwoods survival. And anyway, so one time when he was out, he slipped in a creek and he fell and he hit his head, and he knew he was going unconscious, and he knew that was not a good thing as he was lying in the creek in the middle of winter, right? And so at some point he feels this beautiful, warm hand on his forehead, and he was instantly all right. But his years of being like an outdoorsman and a hunter just had kind of taught him to reach for his gun. And he automatically went for his gun, and he was crying when he said it was just the worst decision he had ever made, because the being who had just healed him, he wasn't even cold, just healed him, stood up and screamed just this horrible, horrible, sad scream and ran off.
That's incredible. Oh, man.
Right. Right? Yeah. And, you know, this is like, you know, a 55-year-old man about, you know, definitely had his years, many years, you know, in the forest. He loved it. It's his life. And, you know, his response was completely natural. You know, completely.
Yeah.
To go to protect, you know? And so, yeah. But, you know, he's just crying. I can never take that back.
It really does come down to how we react to these creatures that are in the woods, and sometimes not even the woods, sometimes around us. And I just want to say, Sonia, thank you so much for spending some time sharing about what you've experienced over the years, and for teaching us some really interesting things that we can implement going forward in our research as well. But thank you so much for coming on, Sonia.
Jeremiah, thank you so much for having me. And one last little bit, even though there's a possibility that my interactions had something to do with my cancer, this is quite true. I wouldn't change it a bit. It just is what it is. A little bit of naivete, maybe. I don't say that is the truth, what happened, but if it is, then it is. So thank you so very much, Jeremiah. I really appreciate you having me and giving the chance to talk about things that I hadn't really talked about before.
Special thanks again to Sonia for coming on the show to share what she's experienced over her Bigfoot research years. Some of it for the first time ever. I appreciate you coming on the show, Sonia. As of time of editing, November 4th, Sonia is still with us. There is a GoFundMe that has been created to help her in the last days of her life. You can find that in the description of this episode. If you feel led, please consider contributing to the GoFundMe. Again, thank you for coming on the show, Sonia, and thank you to all for listening. Please take a minute to help out the show by subscribing on YouTube, making sure you hit the bell so you don't miss any notifications, and share the episode on YouTube with a friend. Also, if you're listening to us on a podcast, thank you so much. Make sure that you're subscribed, share the show with a friend. Really, it's all about sharing the show wherever you can. If you've had a Bigfoot encounter related to the following or know someone who has, please reach out to me at bigfootsociety@gmail.com or pass on my email. Here's a list. If you've had any encounters in Oregon, which I'm sure there's probably a few of you out there, please feel free to reach out immediately. You can use email bigfootsociety@gmail.com. A special thank you to all the Bigfoot Society Patreon and YouTube channel members. It's your support that helps keep the show going, and I extremely appreciate it. If you want to join in the fun, you can join over at patreon.com/The Bigfoot Society. I'll see you there. And again, thanks for listening.